we're very lucky tonight to have Dr. Melanie Hayden Gephart, who is at Stanford, and then Bill Mack, who's also at USC. And they're both amazing neurosurgeon scientists, but they also make it look really easy to manage that with their families. So I realize in the day-to-day, it's probably not as easy as they make it appear. But I thought they would be great examples for us. I would not say that I am the best at this whole work-life balance thing. So Melanie, you want to go first and just give a brief intro?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for inviting me. So I'm Melanie and I'm a brain tumor neurosurgeon at Stanford, and I run a basic science lab looking at rare cancer cell populations that are responsible for progression in GBM and leptomeningeal disease. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about work-life balance or work-life integration, and to also suggest things that work or don't work, because as Dr. Robinson already pointed out, nobody actually has the right answer that fits for everyone, but it's definitely a topic that's very worthy of discussion given the high rates of burnout and physician sort of dissatisfaction overall in our specialty. So looking forward to the discussion.
And Bill?
Hi, Bill Mack here at USC, cerebrovascular neuroendovascular surgeon, and I also have a translational basic science laboratory where I look at inflammation in the setting of cerebrovascular disease. And I think I was chosen to be on this panel because I have 5 children, so people think I know how to balance work-life matters, but I just have a lot of kids.
So if you guys can think back to, let's just say, maybe if you're more mid-career now, if you think back to like your first 3 to 5 years, if you had something to do differently, what would you suggest?
You mean like kind of when we're first starting out, how to do things differently?
Yeah, so if there was anything that in hindsight you would be like, oh, if I would have done this then, that would have made things better.
Yeah,
Or if
I
you
think
found something that worked, that's great.
I think probably there are a couple of good pieces of advice that I was given early on, particularly trying to balance both having a very active clinical schedule and also running a laboratory. And one of the first meetings that I participated in for a grant writing session at Stanford, they had recommended that you need to sort of commit 8 hours every week to creative scientific writing. And everyone was sitting kind of saying, oh my goodness, how in the world are we going to come up with 8 hours in our schedule to commit to that? Not sort of revising a medical student's paper that is sent to you, but actually your own true scientific writing. And the reason why that was a good piece of advice is because up until that point, as the junior person, you're kind of saying yes to many things. And you don't want to miss an opportunity. You don't want to miss cementing a relationship that could be important to you later in your career. And as a result, you have sort of a splattering of meetings all over. You have a variety of responsibilities over which you don't have much control. So for example, when I first started, I had only quote unquote shared block time. And this shared block time was with an elective surgeon who booked his cases 3 months out. So there's no patient with malignant brain cancer who, number one, knows that they have malignant brain cancer, and number two, wants to wait that long. All of my cases, the patients are relatively sick and need surgery quickly. So for the first several years, I operated just off of the wait list, which is exceptionally difficult. There was no work-life balance related to that type of schedule. So part of that commitment to running the laboratory was to sort of set time. And what that forced me to do then was to take these splattering of meetings that ended up all over my schedule and that ended up being difficult to reorganize if and when a patient came in ill and needed something urgently done. It allowed me to sort of have better control of my schedule and sort of fix a date and time where I would say, this is when I would like the meetings to be scheduled, rather than being at the whim of everyone else. And I think having a bit more control over your schedule is one of the great benefits of not being a resident anymore, but also you don't have as much control as you think you would like to have, particularly in our cases, I think, because we take care of patients that need interventions in manners that are unpredictable. So if you can at all sort of try to be very thoughtful about organizing your meetings into times that are set and being able to accommodate for things that are unpredictable, I think overall allows for you to have actually more set time for other things that you enjoy outside of your work as well.
Do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think that's great, Melanie. And I would add, for me, early on in my career, the things I think back to is one thing. So my field is cerebrovascular and endovascular, and especially in the neuroendovascular realm, predictability is just impossible to come by. And I think to get around that, trying to run a laboratory and to do the emergent work, I think a couple things that I was told and was not told, but that stick in my mind now are very important. One is you can't do it all. So meaning you can focus on what you want to do and what you can do, but you can't be the master of everything. And one way, if you want to try and run a lab and do clinical research and be a busy clinician and have your family and outside life, which is so important to everybody, is, I think, specialization, kind of ensuring that your clinical work and your research focuses around the same topic. And you realize when you really do specialize, whether it's in DBS surgery or tumor surgery or vascular surgery, you don't have to do the massive numbers of cases in every field of neurosurgery to become good at something. You've got to prepare for your boards, you've got to be a good general neurosurgeon, but then in your subspecialty, if you're focused in on one area, doing a lot of cases in that area does not take as much time as doing a lot of cases in general neurosurgery as somebody in private practice may want to do or have to do. So I think really having your research line up with your clinical neurosurgery and specializing in that way is important. And also understanding at the beginning that these things all take work and effort and devotion. So if you're going to put a lot of time into your research and you want time left for your well-being and your family, maybe you can't be the busiest surgeon who's doing 30,000 RVUs at all times. I would tell you that that you have to build your clinical practice, and the clinical practice will grow over time. But at the beginning, you have to really foster the research and the academic pursuits that you're gonna want to incorporate into your career, because you won't be able to pick that up as easily later on. And the same is true with everything that goes outside of your job. I think whether it's family or your hobbies or whatever it is that you do, and I could make a couple suggestions on a couple of those later on, but it's just give those the time that they deserve and really schedule out your life so that you understand where you're placing your time and how you're doing it.
Well, that sounds great. I think that was some really good advice that I also received was figuring out those few things that you have control over. There's a lot when you're starting out that people are like, oh, do you feel free to pick up these cases on the weekend that I don't really want? And it's hard to negotiate that sometimes, but you have to walk a fine line of being able to take some of those cases that you don't necessarily want to pick up because of the scheduling things that your senior partners don't want, but yet, maintain your own space, whether that's for the research or for the clinical practice or for your things outside of your professional life. If you guys have questions, if you can raise your hand or put something in the chat that you have a question, that would be great.
And Dody, I can make one more remark, just something that was told to me by my chair, Steve Giannotta, when I started, and this is something I've kept with me through my 15 years or 14 years of practice, is and for me, it's family, it's my children, but for everybody, everybody has their own passion outside of work. Um, I have a lot of children's sports games and a lot of dance recitals and a lot of school plays and such that I want to be at. And it is very easy as a surgeon to just find one reason why you have to be at work, or one more case you got to do, or one more experiment. The advice I was given, and this has really worked for me, is those things like your child's basketball game, or like your child's spring play. Those go on your calendar, your operative calendar, just like your surgeries do. And when I or my assistant puts on at Thursday at 2 p.m. that I'm going to be at the spring play, then no surgery gets booked at that time, and no meeting gets booked at that time, because it's on there as an important event. And it sounds pretty, obvious, but a lot of people don't do that. And I've really made a point of trying to put these important events that I want to be at on my calendar, on my surgical calendar, so everybody recognizes that those things are just as important as the aneurysm clipping or the clinic patients that somebody's going to see.
Yeah, I agree. I do the same thing. Everything is on the calendar. Although I also tend to schedule all of my non-clinical work, because there's a lot of people that will go snooping on your calendar and see blank time, which I have set aside for trying to do some lab work or something. And they're like, oh, I can put a meeting in here. So I don't let anybody schedule those meetings without, or I schedule my non-clinical stuff. So does anybody?
I'm also, yeah, a very simple example of a way to increase efficiency. So previously my clinic blocks were sort of 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. and it was just open and could be scheduled whenever. And what I found was that the visits would get scheduled with like 2-hour gaps between them, or they would not be scheduled sequentially. And so instead, what I asked for, it seems simple, but a clinic template where if for an urgent patient, sure, I will come in between 8:30 and 9:30 and see that urgent patient. But if I can walk my kid to school that day, that is something that I find very fulfilling. And I'd rather not have a patient at 8:30 and then no patients for 2 hours. So creating templates that are fixed and things over which you do have control, I think sometimes allows for the things where you don't have control, where a patient of yours who's ill that comes in and you do miss the orchestra concert, then I think that those little things make the overall sustainability of the work-life integration a bit more tolerable.
And the other thing is, we could probably all talk about the work end of the work-life integration easily, but on the life end, I kind of think about something that both my parents and my wife have kind of told me over and over again. But for me, it works. I want to spend as much quality time with my family as I possibly can outside of work. And that means not being on the phone, not being on the computer. So even if it's less time, I find that if I stay at work a little later and get done what I have to get done, or I wake up, for me, it's wake up early in the morning, get done what I got to be done, and then put the computer away, put the cell phone away, or whatever, just put it on vibrate if you're going to get called, whatever, and just focus on what you got to focus on. And for me, that's helpful to like not work at the kitchen table, have an office that I could go into and do stuff, and that's clear that I'm going to be doing my grant work or whatever. But I've tried to really limit the amount of time that I work at home during the child awake hours. So I get up early in the morning at 5 or 6 and I get some work done. My kids don't get up early anymore. I go into work very early because I have a big LA commute and I'm not going to get to see my kids in the morning either way. So I go into work very early, but I come home for dinner and I just make sure, that's just simply trying to figure out the efficiencies in your own system. Melanie likes to walk her kids to school and I would love to do that, but I just live too far from where I work. But I make sure that if I'm not going to see them in the morning, I get up early and get my work done at work so that I can come home, for an early dinner or spend the night with them or go to their sporting events. So I think you kind of got to work with your own situation and figure out what works well.
I think really that personalization of it is a critical piece. I just Googled pro tips for work-life balance and is like 15 pro tips. And I think I can check like 3 of the 15 boxes.
Well, the
So,
first is don't be a neurosurgeon.
yeah, right, yeah.
And then a neurosurgeon scientist.
Right. And
Right, and
definitely
then
don't be a
combine them
neurosurgeon
all.
scientist.
Yes, exactly. So like many of these would not work for many of us, but I think that part of that is skill development over time, is figuring out the things that you really truly do need. And as another example of sort of wellness for me, is that I do a lot of running, and that helps me kind of clear my mind. It's social. I run with other moms in the neighborhood, and one of the things that we enjoy doing is actually talking about all the things that we said no to this week from work. So ultimately, not at the beginning, but as your career develops, you do want strategies for what things that are going to be taking your time, which is a finite resource, are truly valuable to you professionally, because it is an opportunity cost. Everything comes at some type of sacrifice.
Yeah, I think that that point is really to be in the moment. So whether you're in lab meeting, you don't want to be texting about the patients. You want to be focusing on the data they're presenting or other things you need to be doing. And the same thing when you're outside of work, focus on what you have to get done or enjoy what you're doing and not be stressing about setting up the clinical schedule or things like that.
I would also say at the beginning of my career or whomever's, I mean, this goes without saying to be more efficient in lab, but we're talking about surgeon scientists here, clinical research, lab research. You can't take on that type of endeavor, that type of responsibility without having the right infrastructure and support around you. So, and I don't even mean the family and friends support. I mean, wherever you take your job, your first job, if you want to become a successful physician scientist, forget about having any life. I mean, you need this to have a life outside of it, but to be a successful surgeon scientist, you got to be in the right setup where you have a laboratory that has a technician or postdoctoral, scholars helping you, or clinical research where you have a clinical research coordinator or clinical research nurse, whatever you have to do. That not only helps with your ability to balance things outside of work, but that's, I think, critical in order to get your science and your academic productivity and enterprise up and going. I think I could tell you now, having gone through this, and I couldn't then, I could look at somebody's job description or their job offer and tell them if they're going to be a successful surgeon scientist. And I could probably tell you if you're going to be a successful work-life balance person, because there's telltale signs that would tell a person no, right? And I think you gotta be careful about what you're looking for and what you want in your job, and the people around you and the chair that you have to support whatever it is that's your passion. The same place that's going to make you a successful surgeon scientist may not make you the most successful clinician in the world, right? Doing the most X amount of cases. Those might be two different places. Or the place that may be very friendly to your work-life balance may not be the same place where you can make the most money. Maybe it will be, but maybe it won't be. So I think those things to look at are important.
Yeah, you really need to have the support at work throughout your career. Last week, I had to make an unexpected visit to go help take care of my parents, right? And I also had a grant due at the same day. And so you had to have the systems set up so that everything can still get done. It may not be as perfect as you want it to be. Do you guys have any questions or anything? Being very quiet tonight. All right. So, Bill, if there was something about setting things up that you would make it different, so not something like that we really don't have control over, right? Like the RVU structures and that type of stuff, but something that you do in hindsight, have some control over? Is there anything you would change or do differently, or?
Well, there's probably a number of things I would do differently. I'm trying to think of what would what comes top of mind or what would be most important. Um, I think I would have gone a little easier on the thirst for clinical cases at the beginning. I just didn't believe everybody when they said, "Look, your clinical practice will grow," especially in a field like mine with the neuroendovascular component. Call brings in so much work that it will grow, and I think the most important thing there is um, I wanted to take as much. This sounds silly, but I think for cerebrovascular, it rings true. I think cerebrovascular surgeons want to take call. That's where we get our cases. So a lot of times at the beginning, other people are running away from call, but we want to do that. I would say, the ideal surgeon scientist practice is built focusing on building up your elective practice as much as you possibly can. If you're 20 years in and you're still getting all your cases from call, it means you probably spent a lot of time doing that throughout and maybe didn't spend as much time, whether it was going out there and making friends and getting referrals. So I ultimately found my way to the mix that works for me and is great here. But I think I went a little too hard out of the gate with making sure my clinical practice was as large as it possibly could be, and that just makes it harder on the research end of things to build it up. And what ultimately is sacrificed in that situation, if not the research, it's your well-being and your lifestyle and your life, whether that's your friends or your family or doing whatever you want to do. I mean, I think I've gotten much better at that over time.
Do you have any ideas, Melanie?
Yeah, in addition, what was mentioned, I was going to sort of go also to the chat question about some of these key points for optimizing success from the initial job offer. So I mentioned before having control over your schedule, having actual block time that you can schedule patients into. I made an additional, I think, oversight initially where I was scheduled to have a clinic at a cancer center, which was about between 20 to 60 minutes away from the main campus, depending upon traffic. I considered it a service. I mean, I am a cancer doctor. I want my patients to have their care centralized close to where they are. And I also want to be able to interact with the oncologists, radiation oncologists, medical oncologists, neuro-oncologists who are there close to the patient. So initially I thought that would be reasonable, but what ended up happening is it was quite disruptive to my overall schedule and wellness because I couldn't take call on campus the days I was there. My radiosurgery patients couldn't get treated on the days I wasn't there. I was chronically late to my lab meeting because my clinic always runs over and I couldn't get out of clinic in time to get back with traffic to the main campus. So I did that for a couple of years and then ultimately it just was not sustainable. I think that now with video visits, this was pre-pandemic, so now with video visits that I think is much better, but that's an example where if you're discussing an initial job offer and your initial job offer includes covering 6 different hospitals, that is not a strategy for wellness. Because even if you operate there, who's going to round on those patients post-op? Who's going to see them when there's a problem? In my experience for me and for my residents, I strongly recommend against that. I'm sure many chairs are going to be unhappy with me discouraging their sort of their kind of tentacles that they're putting out into the community by covering them with a bunch of new graduates. But I just don't think, I have not seen that to be successful. I think if you can negotiate for a nurse practitioner, so something that has happened is that you have a clinic that is, my clinics are usually double overbooked and I'm behind. And let's say you're on call or something happens where you need to deal with something urgently. If you have just a nurse manager who's helping in your clinic or residents who are there sporadically, then if something urgent happens, you don't have a nurse practitioner or someone who legally can actually help you to cover patients unsupervised. So having an actual NP in your clinic who can help you even just in emergency situations and field calls and questions that you're just not available to take has been very helpful. And then finally is to say, I did not have an administrator that was actually assigned to me for probably 6 years. And the better you get at writing grants, the more bureaucratic oversight you will have and regular updates that are required all the time. Having someone centralized who can just help, say, with gathering other support documents for your grant submissions, making sure that they remind you in a timely fashion when a particular report might be due, has been very helpful, because there's no part of that administrative oversight that is consistent with wellness, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would add a couple things there to that question of optimizing success. Is one, and I wrote these down. I was going to tick them off in order, but then I got down to the last one, and I think it's by far the most important. It's having a supportive chair or division chief, but I think in neurosurgery, it's really the chair. What's going to make you successful and make you happy as a surgeon scientist and as a person is going to be a chair who gets it. You know, I've talked to a lot of new faculty members who have all the tools to succeed as a surgeon scientist and probably a happy person. But if your boss, whoever that might be, doesn't understand how to push you in the right direction and set up boundaries and check in with you that you're taking the right amount of time to do this or that, it gets overwhelming. And then the things that Melanie talked about, whether it's the committee work or the traveling to the outpost site, it's really hard, and you got to be super efficient. So I think having that supportive chair is what it all comes down to. But the couple other things I would mention are mentorship. In all phases of the beginning of your career, you can't go at this alone, and you can't try and recreate the wheel. Although it's different for every person, there's a lot of tips and tricks that people have been through. One, for example, is I didn't recognize how important it is for me at least, to have your laboratory, if that's what you do, or your clinical research setting right near the hospital. I have talked to so many people who say, yeah, no, there's this fantastic lab, I'm gonna have a great mentor, and it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes away from the hospital. I mean, I don't see how that will ever work. I have to be able to run back and forth to a patient or an emergency and then get back to lab or vice versa. So I think stuff like that, proximity, anything that builds efficiencies is super important.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bob Dempsey, when he's at Madison, Wisconsin, he had the opportunity to set up, you know, when they built a new neuroscience building, and he specifically built the offices next to the lab so that people would be able to be close. I do that. I go in and round and see my patients, and then I can sneak over to the lab and check some slides or something, and then get back to get the OR started. So having that close proximity is really important. I think you can also negotiate certain things that, like, I've never had protected time, but I have had, like you said, supportive chair. And so you may take more call, but if you cannot have to go out to those satellite hospitals, that is just a killer on the time. So if you can negotiate those kind of things when you're starting up, but being at too many places is just too difficult. It often means also like learning new EHR. Like I have 4 different EHRs that I manage right now, but some of them I only go to like once a month. So and I'm a little more, I have my other things set up, so that helps.
I see a question on hours of sleep, and it would be cool to say like 3, but that's not me. I aspire to 7.5, but I get probably 6.5.
Yeah, I would just say that's not one of the, when I did the Google work life pro tips, that's not one of the boxes I checked off. So I think that there's always room for improvement. I suppose all of us are striving for that in terms of our integrative movement forward.
I think if you focus more on, like we get up at 4, so partly to give the dogs a couple of walks before we go into work, but that does get me into work so I can get a lot of things tucked in before the day starts and everybody starts sending all those emails. So it's not, I try not to focus so much on the hours of sleep as much as getting some quality time. If you do your best writing at like midnight, then structure your day so that you have that time protected to get things done that are, and be efficient. Yeah, the sleep doesn't quite cut it always.
But I do like the way it was asked, how many hours do you aspire to?
Yeah. You definitely do better if you get a little bit more sleep, but it just doesn't always work out that way.
Other questions? So I'll bring up another point on the work-life issue. There's a question, but I'll take the time with this and then we can go into that. I have found it, so again, it's all about efficiency and it's all about, so I'll give an example for Melanie and for other people I know. Some folks are very good about bringing their families and children to national meetings. I think that gives you some great time with your family while you're still getting your work done. I've found it great to be able to take up sports that my children play. So I can't afford to go, play a round of golf on Sunday morning and leave 5 children at home with my wife and say, thanks, I've been at work all week and now I'm going to go play a round of golf. But if 2 or 3 of my kids play golf, then all of a sudden I'm having fun and doing some family duties and making everybody happy. So a lot of what I do, I like to try and do with my kids or with my wife. And I mean, everybody needs alone time. There's no doubt about that. But I feel like if I can get my family interested in the things I enjoy or become interested in the things they enjoy, which is more likely, whether it's travel or hiking or food or sports. Sports is a great example. That's just been a great way to really be efficient with that stuff and be able to really enjoy things, not spending more time away from my family.
I'll address maybe the first question of the two in the chat. Thank you for entering those. And the question is, so for those who are maybe just on your phone, is any particular day in the week that you prefer for lab meetings, dedicated time for research? What about OR and clinic days? I do think that it's evolved over time, but I have to say I really like my current setup. So I operate on Mondays. I have clinic Tuesday, Wednesday, but my Tuesday clinic is constrained where it's supposed to be just in the morning. But as I mentioned, I already know that I'm going to run at least an hour behind. So my lab meeting then is from 2 to 4 p.m. and it's on campus. So again, my lab, the hospital, and my clinic are all about a 10-minute walk from each other. So I'm able to regularly get to lab meeting on time. And then Thursday, again, I try to protect, if at all possible, for just creative scientific writing and some catch up. And then meetings pretty much all day Friday. What that means is that although I can't always protect that, because again, we have a fair number of urgent cases or things that come in on call, I'm able to put those in later in the week without disrupting my clinic, which is its own pretty serious problem as you get along to be an attending, is trying to incorporate your unpredictable OR schedule into your immovable clinic. The reason why that works well is that what I did not like is I don't want to compromise my lab meeting time. That's the time where people are committing a lot of time and have worked usually for months to be able to present data to you and to the rest of the team. And I did not want that to be something where my clinic time would run over into it, where I was always missing lab meeting because there was some clinical responsibility, or where I was traveling. So I am pretty strict about not traveling or going to meetings in times that's going to conflict with that Monday through Wednesday, at least, clinical responsibility and lab meeting time. Occasionally, there's things I can't move or that are big responsibilities where I would do that meeting remotely, but I feel like the commitment to the lab to be there during that time is really important. So they also know then that if I do miss a lab meeting because of a clinical responsibility, it's because somebody's very sick, and there's no other way that I was able to be able to move that. And so having that constrained time for me has worked very well, but I will say that was not my schedule when I started out, but did require some advocacy and also some, I think, success in the research realm to be able to rationalize why that setup was important for me.
I also think, you know, this is something Greg isn't here, but he kind of spoke about once, and I really took to heart. The things you put at the end of the day are going to get pushed and pushed off. And so I think I've tried to, on whatever days I'm trying to do it, I try and get my research and my lab meetings and all that stuff at the beginning of the day. It's, you know, if you do a half-day clinic in the morning, it's going to spill into the afternoon, and you're just going to eat up your research time if it, as Melanie said, if it follows your clinic. So I find it actually very helpful to have my research time in the morning and my clinical time a little later in the day, so that, you know, my lab meetings are always first thing in the morning. I also like to have them early in the morning so that folks that want to be participatory in the lab, they have to be the kind of people who are willing to get to the meeting early in the morning and do the work in that way, because it's the only way that works out with mine and other schedules. So I think that's been good. I do my clinic on Monday. That was kind of what was assigned to me at the beginning, but it seems to work really well. It's all day Monday. And I try and have my OR days are Wednesday and Thursday. So kind of Tuesdays and Fridays are my days to do a lot of academic stuff. Fridays are a tough day for anything. They seem to get, I like Melanie's idea of like Fridays being administrative, because they get eaten up by a variety of things anyways. So that's probably a reasonable strategy as well. I was looking at the other questions. Negatively at a private academic institution as long as they have the plan, track record of research. So that's a good question. Offhand, I would tell you what's important to the K12, which is also important to a K08, a K23, is what's the support, what's the infrastructure, what's the mentorship, and you would have to do a good job of convincing people that that private academic setting or institution has the infrastructure, support, and mentorship for you to succeed in research. And if it does, that's fantastic. I mean, you know, if somebody worked at a private academic hospital and their laboratory was at Scripps in San Diego, I mean, that makes sense to me. If it's at a place where, and I don't know where your question's coming from exactly, but if it's at a place that doesn't have an infrastructure built out for research and has never supported someone being successful in career development awards, it'll be an uphill battle, I think.
I also think that there are very few examples, and maybe you will be the exemplary first few, where that system is sustainable in the long run. I think that it takes an incredible amount of infrastructure that you don't necessarily recognize early on in order to be able to maintain a research structure, which is not the same research structure for everyone. But for example, even really simple, straightforward stuff like our grants management office, our office that negotiates the material transfer agreements, that negotiates patents, that does a lot of the institutional sort of oversight that's required for grants, even for not even necessarily for investigator initiated trials versus basic science grants from the government, but also very simple stuff like negotiating overhead costs with industry for clinical trials. Those are generally done by the institution, and many of these private academic groups, either if you are enfolded in that umbrella, great, but many are not. And also the reimbursement and acknowledgement for your work is quite different, I think, at a larger academic center versus this private academic setup, where really the expectation is that you will work and generate revenue for the institution who you serve. And so you want your reflected work on the research end to be acknowledged or recognized or supported in some way. And that's very difficult. And I personally haven't seen many examples of where that's been successful in the long run. But I tend to, in general, be a facilitator, and I want to be encouraging for that plan, and it can be tailored. But I would echo what has already been said, in that it is a challenge to show that you have the right support infrastructure, and I think overall sustainability of that program to make it successful in the long run.
I think it's also important that for the mentored career development awards, you need to be in an environment where you can be mentored. And so that means having other scientists around. And so there's very, very few areas now that you're kind of doing your own research program without collaboration with other people. And so you may be able to do that at a distance, or, there's a lot of variations, but that's the kind of thing that the review committees are going to be looking at. Can you make it happen? At that, you're going to get just under the microscope a little bit more. So it's not that it can't happen, but you just have to be prepared to make your case. The third question there is, how much can you negotiate for research time, protection, and research budget in the initial job? Is it a must to have 2 OR and 2 clinic days a week? So I think we see a lot of variation when people come through for the K12 as well as for the other K awards, and I don't think there's any prescripted setup that you have to have, but it is very important that you can make a convincing case that you will have adequate time. So like the points that Bill and Melanie have emphasized, like not having your lab 20 minutes or 30 minutes away from where your clinic and your OR are, things like that really, sort of are warning signs that it may be challenging. So there's not a prescripted time and setup. They do look like, for example, like Bill was talking about the call, you want to be able to show that you're not going to be taking too much vascular call.
And I'll say,
other areas.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Dody.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was finishing.
I'll take it one step further because I've been on the K23 and K08 study section for the last 5 years. If you submit a K08 or K23 grant with 2 OR days and 2 clinic days a week, you will not get the funding. There's no question about that. So a neurosurgeon is allowed 50% clinical time, which is generous by the NIH standards. Other fields are allowed only 25% clinical time. In other words, if you're a neurologist, you have to have 75% research time and 25% clinical time. There's an allowance for neurosurgeons to have 50% research time and 50% clinical time. But what your chair has to do is write a letter that not just says, I give Bill 50% research and 50% clinical. They have to say, I give Bill 50% research time and 50% clinical time. And during Bill's clinical time, that will be accounted for by 1 OR day a week and 1 clinic day a week, and then another half OR day a week, which comes out to 50% of the time. And the call schedule has to also fit in so that the maximum amount of time you're spending on clinical is 50% of your work week. Not of your neurosurgery 100-hour week, but of your work week. So the way that they want to see it is, 2.5 days of the week you will be clinical, and 2.5 days of the week you will be research. That's the easiest way. You could break it up differently, but the point is, I think the K12 is not dissimilar, although not as rigid. But that's too much clinical time for a career development award, frankly.
Anybody have any other questions? I think when you think about these mentored awards, you have the career development plan, and then you have your science. And, your career development plan is probably half of the weight. And it may not, as you're approaching it as a surgeon scientist, you don't always see it that way. But you really want to make a convincing case with the career development plan. And for the people who don't get the awards, it's often related to the career development award, much more so than the science itself and the novelty and the rigor of the science. So, because most people are in pretty good shape with that. But it is important, and I think as you think about your work-life integration, you gotta have, most of us realize that you have to have that time for creative thinking and writing that Melanie was talking about at the beginning, and having your work-life balance sort of somewhat organized is important. Nobody's thinking about whether you can be awake or not to do this stuff. It's more, are you getting enough rest and a time to focus, to be creative and actually compete as a scientist? You guys have any other questions?
These are good questions. So anything on this, topic or related, these have been good questions posted.
I think also something to keep in mind for the K-12 program is that there's a couple of funded positions, but we try to offer mentoring to a substantial fraction of the folks in the K-12 process through the different programs. So it's very worthwhile to participate in the K-12 process, even if you don't actually get the funding. It can be very, very helpful. And our goal is to help people be successful, not necessarily just receive a K-12.
Yeah, I think a lot of the discussion, things to highlight is not only how to be successful in your career, which of course is fulfilling in and of itself, but how to wrangle a neurosurgery academic career such that you have time for anything else, whatever those things are that help you to feel well and kind of an actual fulfilled person, which you will see as you go over time. There are people who do not manage that well and ultimately are not successful actually in their careers because they haven't honestly maintained the rest of their lives. So whatever that point that you are anticipating that you will be happy and you will be a complete person when you achieve this set thing, that set thing may never happen. And you want to ensure that you are contributing to the things that help you to stay well. Again, no one in neurosurgery is going to be the epitome of being able to show that they were able to do all the things all the time for everyone. But you need to definitely protect the wellness aspects of your life that help to make you a better person and physician overall.
And I would say, and this was somewhat by design and somewhat by circumstance, my work-life integration or work-life balance during residency was terrible. I mean, I don't know how it can be good. I mean, people manage it. I was just trying to hang on to survive kind of thing. There wasn't really work hours at that time, and I was falling asleep eating my sandwich on the couch at 10 p.m. when I came home. And I think it's better now certainly, but it's just really hard. But when you have a little, as Melanie said, when you have a little more control over your schedule and what you are going to make important to you and how you're going to do it, it becomes important to make the real choices about, what is important and what do you do, and keeping your well-being and happiness and sanity in mind. Because I really do think the times that I've been most successful in my professional life as a surgeon scientist is when I've also been kind of hitting on full cylinder, all cylinders out of work, and it's not always like that, but when you're feeling good about things, it's just a lot easier to think well, get stuff done. And it seems a little counterintuitive, but that time's important. It really is.
And did you guys have like protected time, or is it more that you focused your energies on adjusting your schedule, like Melanie was talking about, to realize like going out to the satellite hospital really was a time sink? To me, that I've never had protected time, but I've had ways to, like, I overbook my clinic, but I keep it to a half day. So that guarantees me a little bit of flexibility with the other half of the day rather than having a whole day clinic. And then that day's kind of shot. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about those initial things that you ask for that really make a difference when you're negotiating. Because sometimes just coming in and saying, I want 50% protected time is really hard when the other people looking at the job are not asking for that.
Yeah, when I started, our chair was generous in saying, "Oh, you have this day of the week that you should really be doing research." I don't think it was really regimented out the way it should be. But you know, I was not given 50% protected time. It was one of these situations where it's like, oh, you're going to be a surgeon scientist. Okay, I guess that means you'll be 80% clinical and 80% research, and you know, you'll just get everything done. And that's, you know, finding those efficiencies and trying to maximize your time is the right way of looking at it. But that's, in my opinion, that's not the situation you want to be in. You do want to be in a situation where you have enough protected time for you to get done what you need to get done to start your career. And it's hard. And only a chair who understands that is even going to be in the conversation around that. And I agree with Dody. You know, especially you say, you know, you're a spine surgeon, and those surgeons are meant to be the big RVU generators in the department. How do you come in and ask for protected time, 25%, 50%, whatever it may be? I think that's where the environment in which you work is super important, and trying to understand who's supporting you and what you can leverage to get there.
Yeah, I think that's all important. You have to be very careful who you work for. I think that you do want to be selective. If you choose a place that's never hosted a physician scientist before, it's going to be very difficult to negotiate the package that you need to get started and the time constraints. But I think also you want to be part of the team and contributing meaningfully, including respecting the work of your colleagues who are not involved in research. That said, as I mentioned, so I was willing to consider an offsite cancer center clinic, but when I was asked to cover both surgery and inpatient care for an offsite hospital, it was a hard absolutely not, because I did not think that that was going to be possible given my other academic goals to be able to be covering offsite hospitals, have a laboratory, and even simple stuff like, okay, you want more lab space, we'll move you to a facility that has more space, but that is a 30-minute drive away. Again, that was just not going to be reasonable for me. So I think that knowing things that are negotiable and flexible, and knowing where it's just not workable, is important both at the beginning, but then also to be adaptive and recognize things that are maybe not working and that you need help with moving forward, and asking for that.
And when I negotiated and I wasn't a brilliant negotiator in any way, but when I thought about my first job, or at least the advice I can give to someone thinking about their first job now, the important stuff to focus on is not the salary. I mean, listen, we all want to make a good living. It's not the little bit of an extra salary, the corner office, you know, I need this microscope and that, the other thing. It's really things that you can surround yourself with that will make you successful if you want to be a clinician scientist. You need lab or clinical research support. You need some time. You need people. You can't go at it yourself. You can't start a lab without a tech or without somebody. You cannot believe that you're going to, or I cannot believe that you're going to run over from clinic and carry out all your own experiments and then run back to clinic and not have students or techs or anyone helping you out. It's just that to me doesn't work. You need supplies, you need all those things that will make it run. So I think the negotiation, people get really bogged down in like how much OR time and which days and you know, how much bonus and this and that. That to me is just it gets in the way of what you probably really should be negotiating for, which is whatever you think it is to make yourself successful as a clinician scientist. And you know what? If you're successful in that realm, all those other things will come to you over time. That's my opinion. I know that may not be the popular opinion of everybody, but that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, we have one more question about, do you have to have your own lab space or can you have collaborators? And so I think the official amount is around 1,000 square feet. That's supposed to be yours. But the problem is that if you have space in some Nobel laureate's lab and then they move, then you don't have any setup. So you do need a commitment to a small space, but it is expected with all these K awards that your mentors will provide you with, especially a lot of the heavy duty equipment, like, but you need a culture room or you need a confocal microscope or things like that, that you will have ready access to that equipment, as well as, you know, the experts to teach you how to use that equipment. So it's a combination, but I don't know that anybody from the NIH really comes and measures out the square feet. So
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think they do. And in my experience, I think Dody brings up a good point that you know, you don't want to be in a situation where if your mentor leaves, you're left with nothing. But I've seen successful faculty members who have had their own area within a large mentor's lab, and sometimes that's actually beneficial. You know, we're not that, or I wasn't that adept when I started, that I needed to be in my own room with, you know, no interaction with anyone else. I actually find that having a specific area, be it a bench or two, whatever it is, in your mentor's lab area is really beneficial. And I think I actually see it as somewhat of a strength. But it, when you write up your grant proposal, it shouldn't just be my mentor lets me in their lab and I have space in there. It's got to be, you know, it's got to be an area that is ostensibly yours.
and also your mentors, you know, lab team can help teach your tech new techniques or things if they need some support. So it is nice for them to not be working in isolation just when you can come over. So we certainly support being in a collaborative situation, but technically on the paper, it needs to say you have a little bit of your own space. So we're running up against time. I really want to thank Melanie and Bill for providing all their wisdom and insights, and for making it look at least like most of the time they have everything working well. They're examples I look up to. So if you guys do have questions, you can totally feel free to email any of us anytime. We're happy to help. You know, because sometimes it's a pretty easy thing to say, oh yeah, this looks like a good situation or not, or help you through some of those steps. So
yeah, please feel free to reach out anytime. Absolutely. I think our
Great.
emails are somewhere included. If not, I'm happy to post mine or whatever.
Thanks again for hosting us, and good luck. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
all right, take care everyone. Have a great evening.